Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is WireDogSec, and I'm back with another video for you guys. Today's video, we are going to continue on with TryHackMe's offensive security learning path. This is the lateral movement and pivoting room. Learn about common techniques used to move laterally across a Windows network. Let's go ahead and dive into it. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Be sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. Once you subscribe, be sure to hit that notification bell. All right, so you know every time I post a new video. As you can see here, most people that view my videos, view my channel, are not subscribed. Now, if you do subscribe, it will help me get into the YouTube algorithm so that we can continue to grow our glorious community here. As always, thank you all for taking the time to watch. Have a nice day and enjoy the video. In this room, we will look at lateral movement, a group of techniques used by attackers to move around the network while creating as few alerts as possible. We'll learn about several common techniques used in the wild for this end, and the tools involved. It is recommended to go through the breaching AD and enumerating AD rooms for this one, which we've already done. Learning objectives. Familiarize yourself with lateral movement, techniques used by attackers. Learn how to use alternative authentication material to move laterally. Learn different methods to use compromised hosts as pivots. Connecting to the network. Once again, read through this if you're interested in using attack box or your own VM. I've already done this. I was having some issues with DNS again, but we're going to continue through it and see if it will cause any issues later on down the road. But once again, on the right side, I got my Kali box spun up, ready to go. So let's go ahead and just skip through some of this here. And it says requesting your credentials, which I've already done. All right, just navigate to that same website, hit get credentials button there, and these are the creds that I'm going to be using. So let me go ahead and just copy these, and then going to go back into our terminal as soon as I can find it. There we go. And I'm just going to do an ls. Okay, and then I'm going to do just a nano creds.txt, paste this info in there, like so, and then save it. There we go. So we got creds again. Awesome. So go ahead and clear all this out. And let's continue on. It says for SSH access, do the following here. And let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and cat those creds again. And then I'm going to copy and paste and then edit the applicable placeholders like we did before. All right. So let's go ahead and type in the username. It's Tracy Turner. Okay. Hit yes. All right. Now, should be good to go. Awesome. A note on reverse shells. If you're using an attack box and have joined other network rooms before, be sure to select the IP, yada, yada, yada. All right, if you're using the attack box, go ahead and follow these instructions here, which I'm going to skip over because I'm not using the attack box. It says this will be helpful whenever needing to do a reverse shell connection back to your attacker machine throughout the room. So I'm going to hit complete to continue on past this. And let's see what task 2 has to say. It says, moving through the network, what is lateral movement? Simply put, lateral movement is the group of techniques used by attackers to move around a network. Once an attacker has gained access to the first machine of a network, moving is essential for many reasons, including the following: reaching our goals as attackers, bypassing network restrictions in place, establishing additional points of entry to the network, creating confusion, and avoid detection. While many cyber kill chains reference lateral movement as an additional step on a linear process, it is actually part of a cycle. During the cycle, we use any available credentials to perform lateral movement, giving us access to new machines where we elevate privileges and extract credentials if possible. With the newfound credentials, the cycle starts again, and there it is. Initial recon, initial compromise, establish foothold, escalate privileges, etc., etc. Usually, we will repeat this cycle several times before reaching our final goal on the network. If our first foothold is a machine with very limited or little access to other network resources, we might need to move laterally to other hosts that have more privileges on the network. A quick example. Suppose we are performing a red team engagement where our final goal is to reach an internal code repository where we got our first compromise on the target network by using a phishing campaign. Usually, phishing campaigns are more effective against non-technical users, so our first access might be through a machine in the marketing department. Marketing workstations will typically be limited through firewall policies to access any critical services on the network, including administrative uh, protocols, database ports, monitoring services, or any other that aren't required for their day-to-day labor, including code repositories. To reach sensitive hosts and services, we need to move to our host and pivot from there to our final goal. To this end, we could try elevating privileges on the marketing workstation and extracting local users' password hashes. If we find a local administrator, the same account may be present on other hosts. After doing some recon, we find a workstation with the name dev-001-PC. We use the local administrator's password hash to access dev-001-PC and confirm it. It is owned by one of the developers in the company. From there, access to our target code repository is available, and there's a little diagram here or a little image here that shows what they're talking about here. Notice that while lateral movement might need to be used to circumvent firewall restrictions, it is also helpful in evading detection. In our example, even if the marketing workstation had direct access to the code repository, it is probably desirable to connect through the developer's PC. This behavior would be less suspicious from the standpoint of a blue team analyst checking login audit logs. The attacker's perspective. There are several ways in which an attacker can move laterally. The simplest way to do or would be to be or simplest way would be to use standard administrative protocols like WinRM, RDP, VNC, or SSH to connect to other machines around the network. This approach can be used to emulate regular users' behaviors somewhat, as long as some coherence is maintained when planning where to connect with what account. While a user from IT connecting to the web server via RDP might be usual and go under the radar, care must be taken not to attempt suspicious connections. For example, or e.g., why is the local admin user connecting to dev-01-PC from the marketing PC? Attackers nowadays also have other methods of moving laterally, while making it somewhat more challenging for the blue team to detect what is happening effectively. While no technique should be considered infallible, we can at least attempt to be as silent as possible. In the following task, we will look at some of the most common lateral movement techniques available, administrators, and UAC. While performing most of the lateral movement techniques introduced throughout the room, we will mainly use administrator credentials. While one might expect that every single administrator account would serve the same purpose, a distinction has to be made between the two types of administrators. You got local accounts, part of the local administrators groups, you got domain accounts, part of the local administrators group. The differences we are interested in are restrictions imposed by user access or user account control, also known as UAC for short, over local administrators except for the default administrator account. By default, local administrators won't be able to remotely connect to a machine and perform administrative tasks unless using an interactive session through RDP. Windows will deny any administrative task requested via RPC, SMB, or WinRM, since such administrators will be logged into or logged in with a filtered medium integrity token, preventing the account from doing privileged actions. The only local account that will get full permission or privileges is the default administrator account. Domain accounts with local administration privileges won't be subject to the same treatment and will be logged in with full administrative privileges. This security feature can be disabled if desired, and sometimes you will find no difference between local and domain accounts in the administrators group. Still, it's essential to keep in mind that should some of the lateral movement techniques fail, it might be due to using a non-default local administrator where UAC is enforced. You can read more about this security feature here, so click that, read about it if you're interested. We're going to move on. Task 3, spawning processes remotely. And let's see what they say. This task will look at the available methods an attacker has to spawn a process remotely, allowing them to run commands on machines where they have valid credentials. Each of the techniques discussed uses slightly different ways to achieve the same purpose, and some of them might be a better fit for some specific scenarios. PSExec, ports 445, TCP, SMB, required group membership administrators. PSExec has been the go-to method when needing to execute processes remotely for years. It allows an administrator to run commands remotely on any PC where he has access. PSExec is one of many sys internal tools and can be downloaded here. So click that if you want to go ahead and download PSExec. The way PSExec works is as follows. 1. Connect to admin $share and upload a service binary. PSExec uses PSX svc.exe as the name. Number 2, connect to the service control manager to create and run a service named PSEXE svc and associate the service binary with C Windows PSEXE svc.exe. Create some named pipes to handle standard in, standard out, standard error. All right. And here's a picture of what that process looks like. So take a minute to read through that. Then let's continue on. To run a PSExec, we only need to supply the required administrator credentials for the remote host, and the command we want to run, psexec64.exe, is available under C Tools and the jump box for your convenience. So let's go ahead and go over to C Tools. So let's go ahead and change directory to C and then Tools. Oop. Okay, let's try this again. There we go. Let's do a dir on it. And there's quite a few items in there, but there's PSExec right there. So let's go ahead and clear all this stuff out. Okay, now we're ready to go. So I'm going to copy and paste, and of course, replace the placeholders. Well, I guess we're not going to use this yet, but they're giving you the syntax of how to use it. All right. So let's go ahead and continue on. Remote process creation using WinRM. Ports 5985 TCP, WinRM HTTP, or 5986 TCP, WinRM HTTPS. Required group memberships, remote management users. Windows Remote Management WinRM is a web-based protocol used to send PowerShell commands to a remote Windows host. Most Windows servers installation will have WinRM enabled by default, making it an attractive attack vector. To connect to a remote PowerShell session from the command line, we can use the following command: winrs.exe-u administrator password and -r target cmd. We can achieve the same from PowerShell, but to pass different credentials, we will need to create a PS credential object. You can do that with this here. Once we have our PS credential object, we can create an interactive session using the enter-ps session commandlet, which is this here. PowerShell also includes the invoke commandlet, which runs script blocks remotely via WinRM. Credentials must be passed through PS credential objects as well. You can do that with this. And it says remotely creating services using SC. Ports 135 TCP. Well, you can see the rest there. 445, 139. Required group membership administrators. Windows services can also be leveraged to run arbitrary commands since they execute a command when started. While a service executable is technically different from a regular application, if we configure a Windows service to run any application, it will still execute it and fail afterwards. We can create a service on a remote host with sc.exe, a standard tool available in Windows. When using sc, it will try to connect to the Service Control Manager SVC CTL remote service protocol through RPC in several ways. Number 1, a connection attempt will be made using DCE/RPC. The client will first connect to the endpoint mapper EPM at port 135, which serves as a catalog of available RPC endpoints and requests information on the SVC CTL service program. The EPM will then respond with the IP and port to connect to SVC CTL, which is usually a dynamic port in the ranges of 49,152 to 65,535. And here's a image of what that looks like here. So take a moment to read through that. We're going to continue on to number 2 here. If the latter connection fails, SC will try to reach SVC CTL through SMB named pipes, either on port 445 SMB or 139 SMB over net BIOS. And that's what this looks like here in this infographic. We can create and start a service named THM service using the following commands. You got sc.exe, target create THM service, bin path equals net user, yada yada yada, add start equals auto sc.exe, target start THM service. The net user command will be executed when the service is started, creating a new local user on the system. Since the operating system is in charge of starting the service, you won't be able to look at the command output. To stop and delete the service, we can then execute the following commands, which is this here. All right, you got stop and then delete. Creating scheduled tasks remotely. Another Windows feature we can use is scheduled tasks. You can create and run one remotely with scheduled tasks available in any Windows installation. To create a task name, THM task 1, we can use the following commands. You got ch task, and then you can see the rest here. /s target RU, and then in quotes system create tn thm task 1 tr command payload to execute, etc. And you got ch tasks /s target run tn thm task 1. We set the schedule type sc to once, which means the task is intended to be run only once at the specified time and date. Since we'll be running the task manually, the starting date and starting time won't matter much anyway. Since the system will run the scheduled task, the command's output won't be available to us, making this a blind attack. Finally, to delete the scheduled task, we can use the following command and clean up after ourselves. So schedule task, and then you can see the rest there. All right, it says let's get to work. To complete this exercise, you will need to connect to the jump box 2 using the credentials assigned to you for task 1. If you haven't done so already, click on the link and then get the credentials. Once you have credentials, SSH into it using that, which I've already done here. For this exercise, we'll assume we have already captured some credentials with administrative access. And there's the user za.tryhackme.com/t1 underscore leonard.summers. Password easy pass forever. We'll show how to use those credentials to move laterally to THMIS using sc.exe. Feel free to try other methods as they all should work against THMIS. While we have already shown how to use sc to create a user on a remote system by using netuser, we can also upload any binary we'd like to execute and associate it with the created service. However, if we try to run a reverse shell using this method, we will notice that the reverse shell disconnects immediately after execution. The reason for this is that the service executes or executables are different to standard .exe files, and therefore non-service executables will end up being killed by the service manager almost immediately. Luckily for us, MSF Venom supports exe-service format, which will encapsulate any payload we like inside a fully functional service executable, preventing it from getting killed. To create a reverse shell, we can use the following command. Note, since you will be sharing the lab with others, you'll want to use a different file name for your payload instead of myservice.exe to avoid overwriting someone else's payload. All right, so let's go ahead and copy and paste this over. So I'm going to copy this, and then we're going to need to, let's see here. Okay, let's just do it in this one. All right, so I'm going to paste this in, and I'll just change this to something else. Let's just do, I don't know, I guess mal SVC there. So while that's generating, we will then proceed to use t underscore Leonard.Summers credentials to upload our payload to the admin $share of THMIS using SV client from our attack box. And let's see, I'm pretty sure I do have that's on by default. Oop, oh, I forgot I was updating stuff on there. Oh. Okay, so this is taking a while to generate, but let's see here. Let's get this onto the victim machine. Let's go ahead and copy and paste. Ah, okay. Duh. I forgot to do the placeholders. All right, let me fix this and then we'll continue. Now that is all set, let's go ahead and continue on here. It says, once our executable is uploaded, we will set up a listener on the attacker's machine to receive a reverse shell from MSF console. And let's go ahead and clear all this stuff out. MSF console. So while that's starting up, I'm going to get ready to copy this stuff over. Set lhost, set lport, set payload, Rochelle exploit. Okay, seems pretty simple. And as soon as it starts up, we'll get that going here shortly. Now it has finally started. Let's go ahead and continue. Alternatively, you can run the following one-liner on your Linux machine. Do the same. Since sc.exe doesn't allow us to specify credentials as part of the command, we need to use runAs to spawn a new shell with Leonard.Summers access token. Still, we only have SSH access to the machine, so if we tried something like runAs net only, etc., the new command prompt would spawn on the user session, but we would have no access to it. To overcome this problem, we can use runAs to spawn a second reverse shell with Leonard.Summers access token. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and copy and paste this over. And it says to do this in the jump box, so let's go back over to that. There we go, and I'm gonna paste this over. And I'll make sure everything's squared away here. I need to change attacker IP. Okay. 10.50.207.53. All right, looks good. And what was his password? Easy pass. Okay, so that part's done, and let's go ahead and continue. Netcat listener, that was already running. Yep. So we can see that here. And it says that notes, remember that since you're using runAs with the net only option, it will not bother to check if the provided credentials are valid. So be sure to type the password correctly. If you don't, you will see some access denied errors later in this room. We can receive the reverse shell connection with Netcat, which we see that here. Finally, proceed to create a new service remotely using SC associating it with our uploaded binary. First off, let me check something here. So let's do a dir and let's do, was it za.tryhackme.com and then sysvol. Okay, I think we're good to go here. So let's go ahead and continue with this here, and I need to do this in this session here. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy this and paste here. It says be sure to change the name of your service to avoid clashing with other students. Once you have started the service, you should receive a connection in your attack box from where you can access the flag. So I've already have that pulled up here, and I've already made the applicable edits. So I'm going to just copy and paste this over. All right, let's go and do that. Okay, created service success, and then we need to start it. So I'm going to copy this, paste it over, and then change the service to WireDog SVC. Okay. It says running. So let's flip back over to our interpreter session here, or our session here from Metasploit, and looks like it was successful. So let's do a who am I? Awesome, NT authority system. Great. It says after running the flag.exe file on Leonard.Summer's desktop on THMIS, what is the flag? So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to CD to C, and then, okay, we can't do that either. Okay, whatever. And CD into desktop. Okay, see what's in here. There it is. So let's go ahead and do that. I believe you just do it like this. There we go. So go ahead and grab that flag. Awesome. Okay, I've never done it this way before, but that's interesting method. Let's go ahead and continue to task number 4, moving laterally using WMI. And let's see what they say. We can also perform many techniques discussed in the previous task differently by using Windows Management Instrumentation, WMI. WMI is Windows implementation of Web-Based Enterprise Management, WBM, an enterprise standard for accessing management information across devices. In simpler terms, WMI allows administrators to perform standard management tasks that attackers can also be used to perform lateral movement in various ways, which we'll discuss. Connecting to WMI from PowerShell. Before being able to connect to WMI using PowerShell commands, we need to create a PS credential object with our user and password. This object will be stored in the $credential variable and utilized throughout the techniques on this task. Okay, so we need to, I guess, copy and paste this over. We then proceed to establish a WMI session using either one of the following protocols. DCOM RPC over IP will be used for connecting to WMI. This protocol uses port 135 TCP and ports 49, 152, 265, 535 TCP. Just to explain, when using SC.exe, WS-MAN, WinRM will be used for connecting to WMI. This protocol uses ports 5985 TCP, WinRM HTTP, or 5986 TCP, WinRM HTTPS. Just to establish a WMI session from PowerShell, we can use the following commands and store the session on $session variable, which we'll use throughout the room on different techniques. That's what that looks like here. It says the new sim a sim session option commandlet is used to configure configure the connection options for the WMI session, including the connection protocol. The options and credentials are then passed to new sim session commandlet to establish a session against a remote host. This is our remote process creation using WMI, ports 135, etc. Required group memberships, administrators. We can remotely spawn a process from PowerShell by leveraging Windows Management Instrumentation, sending a WMI request to Win32 underscore process class to spawn the process under the session we created before, and that's what it looks like here. Notice that WMI won't allow you to see the output of any command, but will indeed create the required process silently. On legacy systems, the same can be done by using wmic from the command prompt. That's what that looks like here. Okay. It says creating services remotely via WinRM. You got the ports here, 135, 49, 152, etc., 5985, etc. Required group memberships, administrators. We can create services with WMI through PowerShell. To create a service called THM Service 2, we can use the following command. That's what it looks like here. And then we can get a handle on the service and start it with the following commands. Finally, we can stop and delete the service with the following commands. Creating scheduled tasks remotely with WMI. These are the ports, required memberships, administrators. We can create and execute scheduled tasks by using some commandlets available in Windows default installations. This payload must be split into command and args, and that's what it looks like here. To delete scheduled tasks, after it has been created, use the following command. Okay, installing WMI packages through the MSI packages through WMI. There's the ports, administrators group. MSI is a file format. If we can copy an MSI package to the target system, we can then use WMI to attempt to install it for us. The file can be copied in any way available to the attacker. Once the MSI file is the target system, in the target system, we can attempt to install it by invoking win32 underscore product class through WMI like this. We can achieve the same by using on legacy systems by using this. Let's get to work. Credentials, haven't done so, click the link. Okay, we have our credentials. For this exercise, we'll assume we already captured some credentials with administrative access, and those are here. We'll show how to use those credentials to move laterally to THMIS using WMI and MSI packages. Feel free to try any other methods presented during this task. We will start by creating our MSI payload with MSF Venom from our attacker machine. Since you will be sharing the lab with others, you'll want to use a different file name for your payload instead of myinstaller.msi to avoid overriding someone else's payload. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. And let's go ahead and, okay, let me go ahead and kill this. All right. And go ahead and clear all this stuff out. Do the same thing as you did in the previous task, except you're going to use this format here for MSF Venom, which I've already done. All right. And there you go. See, it's generated, and I have it onto the target system. All right, I already have this up and running. So everything looks set. Now I need to get onto the jump box here and copy and paste this information over. So let's go ahead and do that. Hopefully this doesn't error out on me. All right. Okay. And then this invoke here, I need to change this to my payload. Let's do it this way then. All right, awesome. Now we can do who am I? Anti-authority system, sweet. So let's do the usual cd into users. CD into this Korean waters. Okay, and then desktop. Okay, and then flag.exe. There we go. Awesome. Now let's continue on with task number 5. Task 5, use of alternative authentication material. By alternative authentication material, we refer to any piece of data that can be used to access a Windows account without actually knowing a user's password itself. This is possible because of how some authentication protocols used by Windows networks work. In this task, we will take a look at a couple of alternatives available to log as a user when either of the following authentication protocols is available on your network: NTLM authentication, Kerberos authentication. During this task, you are assumed to be familiar with the methods and tools to extract credentials from a host. Mimikatz will be used as the tool of choice for credential extraction throughout the room. NTLM authentication. Before diving into the actual lateral movement techniques, let's take a look at how NTLM authentication works. Okay, here's a little diagram of it, but let's go ahead and read through this. The client sends an authentication request to the server they want to access. The server generates a random number, sends it as a challenge to the client. The client combines his NTLM password hash with the challenge and other known data to generate a response to the challenge and sends it back to the server for verification. The server forwards both the challenge and the response to the domain controller for verification. The domain controller uses the challenge to recalculate the response and compares it to the initial response sent by the client. If they both match, the client is authenticated. Otherwise, access denied. The authentication result is sent back to the server. The server forwards the authentication result to the client. Note, the described process applies when using a domain account. If a local account is used, the server can verify the response to the challenge itself without requiring interaction with the domain controller since it has the password hash stored locally in its SAM. Pass the hash. As a result of extracting credentials from a host where we have attained administrative privileges by Mimikatz or similar tools, we might get clear text passwords or hashes that can be easily cracked. However, if we aren't lucky enough, we will end up with non-cracked NTLM password hashes. Although it may seem we can't really use those hashes, the NTLM challenge sent during authentication can be responded to just by knowing the password hash. This means we can authenticate without requiring the plaintext password to be known instead of having to crack NTLM hashes. If the Windows domain is configured to use NTLM authentication, we can pass the hash and authenticate successfully. To extract NTLM hashes, we can either use Mimikatz to read the local SAM or extract hashes directly from LSAS. Extracting NTLM hashes from local SAM. This method will only allow you to get hashes from local users on the machine. No domain users' hashes will be available, and that's how you do it here. Privilege debug, token elevate, LSA dump SAM. Extracting NTLM hashes from LSAS memory. This method will let you extract any NTLM hashes for local users and any domain user that's recently logged onto the machine. All right, do that with sec urlsa msv. We can then use the extracted hashes to perform pass the hash attack by using Mimikatz to inject an access token for the victim user on a reverse shell or any other command you like as follows. And that's what it looks like here, token revert, etc., etc. Notice we use token revert to reestablish our original token privileges, as trying to pass the hash with an elevated token won't work. This will be the equivalent of using run as net only, but with a hash instead of a password, and will spawn a new reverse shell from where we can launch any command as the victim user. To receive the reverse shell, we should run a reverse listener on attack box, which I have running right there. Interestingly, if you run the who am I command on the shell, it will still show up or show you the original user you were before using past the hash. But any information run from here will actually use the credentials injected using pass hash using Linux. If you have actual Linux box, several tools that have built-in support to perform pass hash using different protocols depending on which services are available to you. You can do the following here: RDP using pass hash, XRDP via psexec command, or sorry, connect to WinRM using pass hash. Let's see here. Are we supposed to be doing this? Not sure, but let's go and continue on. And they're going to talk about Kerberos authentication. Let's have a quick look at how Kerberos authentication works on Windows networks. The user sends his username and timestamp encrypted using a key derived from his password to the key distribution center. A service usually installed on the domain controller in charge of creating Kerberos tickets on the network. The KDC will create and send back a ticket granting ticket, allowing the user to request tickets to access specific services without passing their credentials to the services themselves. Along with the TGT, a session key is given to the user, which they will need to generate the requests that follow. Notice the TGT is encrypted using the KRB TGT account's password hash, so the user can't access its contents. It is important to know that the encrypted TGT includes a copy of the session key as part of its content, and the KDC has no need to store the session key as it can recover a copy by decrypting the TGT if needed. And this is what it looks like here, that process. When users want to connect to a service on the network, like a shared website or database, they will use their TGT to ask for or ask the KDC for a ticket granting service. TGS. TGS are tickets that allow connection only to the specific service for which they are created. To request a TGS, the user will send his username and a timestamp encrypted using the session key along with the TGT and the service principal name, which indicates the service and server name we intend to access. As a result, the KDC will send us a TGS and a service session key, which we will send or need to authenticate to the service we want to access. A TGS is encrypted using the service owner hash. The service owner is the user or machine account under which the service runs. The TGS copies a copy or contains a copy of the service session key on its encrypted content so that the service owner can access it by decrypting TGS. And this is what it looks like here. The TGS can then be sent to the desired service to authenticate and establish a connection. The service will use its configured account's password hash to decrypt the TGS and validate the session key. Pass the ticket. Sometimes it will be possible to extract Kerberos tickets and session keys from LSAS memory using Mimikatz. The process usually requires us to have system privileges on the attacked machine. It can be done as follows: tickets sec URLSA, tickets exports. Notice that if we only had access to a ticket but not its corresponding session key, we wouldn't be able to use that ticket. Therefore, both are necessary. While Mimikatz can extract any TGT or TGS available from the memory of the LSAS process, most of the time we'll be interested in TGTs as they can be used to request service or request access to any services the user is allowed to access. At the same time, TGSs are only good for a specific service. Extracting TGTs will require us to have administrators' credentials, and extracting TGSs can be done with a low privilege account, only the ones assigned to the account. Once we have extracted the desired ticket, we can inject the ticket into the current session with the following command. So Kerberos, then PTT is like pass the ticket. And it says injecting tickets in our own session doesn't require administrator privileges. After this, the tickets will be available for any tools we use for lateral movement. To check if the tickets were correctly injected, you can use the klist command like so. Okay. Then it starts talking about overpass the hash, then pass the key. This kind of attack is similar to pass the hash, but applied to Kerberos networks. When a user requests a TGT, they send a timestamp encrypted with an encryption key derived from their password. The algorithm used to derive this key can either be DS, RC4, yada yada yada, depending on the installed Windows version and Kerberos configuration. If we have any of those keys, we can ask the KDC for a TGT without requiring the actual password, hence the name pass the key. We can obtain the Kerberos encryption keys from memory by using Mimikatz, following commands, debug, SecRLSA, E keys. Depending on the available keys, we can run the following commands on Mimikatz to get a reverse shell via pass the key. It says NC64 is already available for your convenience. If we have the RC4 hash, you can use this, and then so on and so forth. Notice that when using RC4, the key will equal NTLM hash of the user. This means that if we could extract the NTLM hash, we could use it to request TGT as long as the RC4 is one of the payload or one of the enabled protocols. This particular variant is usually known as overpass the hash. To receive the reverse shell, we should run a listener on the attacker box. Just ask what's pass the hash, any command run from the shell. We'll use the credentials injected via Mimikatz. All right, it says let's get to work. I'm already connected with SSH here, signed in. Since using SSH session, use Mimikatz to extract authentication material and perform pass the hash, pass the ticket, or pass the key against this user here, Toby.Beck. Once you have a command prompt with his credentials loaded, use WinRS to connect to a command prompt on THMIS. Since Toby.Beck's credentials are injected in your session as a result of any attacks, you can use WinRS without specifying any credentials, and it will use the ones available in your session. Okay. You'll find a flag on the desktop, both Mimikatz, PSExec64 available, and ctools. All right, so let's just go ahead and navigate to ctools. All right. Once again, you can see it up there. All right. So we need to get this guy's creds here and then access this flag. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me go. Mimikat's fired up. Privilege debug. Token elevate. And I'm doing this one here. So if I scroll down a little bit, yeah, impersonate it. There we go. Now we need to go find this Toby account. There's quite a few of them in here. There's 4, which is not the one we need. And let's keep scrolling. There we go. So went ahead and grabbed that NTLM hash here. All right, have it ready to go like so. Netcat's already running. So all I need to do is just plug this in after I do this revert here. So let me go ahead and hit enter and then do this token revert. Okay. And then paste this in. Should be good. All right, now let's see here. There we go. Why? All right, still shows us that. Now we have to do this here. So I need a CD here and the CD into tools. Okay, paste this in. Awesome. Now we're signed in as him. So dir CD into desktop. Okay. And then let's try this. Awesome. So that solves this one, and then we'll continue on to the next task. Task 6, abusing user behavior. Under certain circumstances, an attacker can take advantage of actions performed by users to gain further access to machines in the network. While there are many ways this can happen, we will look at some of the most common ones: abusing writable shares. It is quite common to find network shares that legitimate users use to perform day-to-day tasks when checking corporate environments. If those shares are writable for some reason, an attacker can plant specific files to force users into executing an arbitrary payload and gain access to their machines. One common scenario consists of finding a shortcut to a script or executable file hosted on a network share. The rationale behind this is that the administrator can maintain an executable on a network share, and users can execute it without copying or installing the application to each user's machine. If we, as attackers, have write permissions over such scripts or executables, we can backdoor them to force users to execute any payload we want. Although the script or executable is hosted on a server, when a user opens the shortcut on his workstation, the executable will be copied from the server to its temp folder and executed on the workstation. Therefore, any payload will run in the context of the final user's workstation and logged in user account, backdooring .vbs scripts. As an example, if the shared resource is a VBS script, we can put a copy of nc64.exe on the same share and inject the following code into the script. This will copy nc64.exe from the share to the user's workstation temp directory and send a reverse shell back to the attacker whenever a user opens the shared VBS script. Backdooring exe files. If the shared file is a Windows binary, say putty.exe, you can download it from the share and use MSFvenom to inject the backdoor into it. The binary will still work as usual, but execute an additional payload silently. To create a backdoored putty.exe, we can use the following command, like so. The resulting putty.exe will execute a reverse TCP payload, interpreter payload without the user noticing it. Once the file has been generated, we can replace the executable on the Windows share and wait for any connections using exploit multi-handler, module for Metasploit, RDP hijacking. When an administrator uses remote desktop to connect to a machine and closes the RDP client instead of logging off, his session will remain open on the server indefinitely. If you have system privileges on the Windows Server 2016 or earlier, you can take over any existing RDP session without requiring a password. If we have the administrator level access, we can get system by any method of our preference. For now, we will be using psexec to do so. First, let's run command.exe. From there, run psexec64.exe, variable tools, psexec.exe -s cmd. To list existing sessions on a server, you can use the following command: query user. According to the command outputs above, if we were currently connected via RDP using the administrator user, our session name would be RDP-TCP. We can also see that a user named Luke has left a session open with ID 3. Any session with a disk state has been left open by the user and isn't being used at the moment. While you can take over active sessions as well, the legitimate user will be forced out of his session when you do, which could be noticed by them. To connect to a session, we will use the tscon.exe and specify the session ID we will be taking over as well as our current session name. Following the previous example, to take over Luke's session, if we were connected as the administrator user, we'd use the following command: tscon3 dest rdp-tcp number 6. In simple terms, the command states that the graphical session 3 owned by Luke should be connected with RDP session rdp-tcp number 6 owned by the administrator user. As a result, we'll rename or resume Luke's RDP session and connect to it immediately. Note, Windows Server 2019 won't allow you to connect to another user session without knowing its password. Let's get to work. Once again, get some creds if you need them. It says for this task, we'll be working on hijacking an RDP session. If you are interested in trying backdooring XE or the files, you can find some exercises about this in the Windows Local Persistence room. Follow the instructions to hijack toby.bex RDP session on the jump box to get the flag. Note, when executing query session, you'll see several users named Toby Beck followed by a number. These are just identical copies of the same user, and you can hijack any of them. You don't need to hijack them all. Make sure you hijack a session marked as a disconnected disk to avoid interfering with other users. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And I'm already have this open somewhere, but let me just kill this real quick. Okay. And I'm already logged in with my new creds. Be sure to use this link here to get your new creds and then RDP into it. And then I'm navigated into this tools directory and let's do a dir on it. It should be, okay, psexec.exe. So let's see here. psexec.exe. And there's something we had to do with this. Yep. All right. So -s and then cmd.exe. Okay. We gotta clear all this stuff out. Oops. Can I clear the screen? All right, whatever. And let's see here, query user. Okay, now we need to hijack it with tscon. And then let's target 3, and then dest. It's going to be RDP-TCP #61. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's see if I can just copy the all right. So I type this in. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Awesome. Now let's go to task number 7, port to forwarding, and this looks like it might be a long read here. Task 7, port forwarding. Most of the lateral movement techniques we have presented require specific ports to be available for an attacker in real-world networks the administrators may have blocked some of these ports for security reasons or have implemented segmentation around the network, preventing you from reaching SMB, RDP, WinRM, or RPC ports. To go around these restrictions, we can use port forwarding techniques, which consist of using any compromised host as a jump box to pivot to our other hosts. It is expected that some machines will have more network permissions than others, as every role in a business will have different needs in terms of what network services are required for day-to-day work. SSH tunneling. The first protocol we'll be looking at is SSH, as it is already built in already has built-in functionality to do port forwarding through a feature called SSH tunneling. While SSH used to be a protocol associated with Linux systems, Windows now ships with OpenSSH client by default, so you can expect to find it in many systems nowadays, independent of their operating system. SSH tunneling can be used in different ways to forward ports through an SSH connection, which we'll use depending on the situation. To explain each case, let's assume a scenario where you've gained control over PC1 machine. It doesn't need to be administrator access, and would like to use it as a pivot to access a port on another machine to which we can't directly connect. We will start a tunnel from PC1, acting as an SSH client, to the attacker's PC, which will act as an SSH server. The reason to do so is that you'll often find SSH client on a Windows machine, but no SSH server will be available most of the time. Since we'll be making a connection back to our attacker's machine, we'll want to create a user in it without access to any console for tunneling, and set a password to use for it to create tunnels. You can do it like this. Depending on your needs, the SSH tunnel can be used to do either local or remote port forwarding. Let's take a look at each case. SSH remote port forwarding. In our example, let's assume that firewall policies block the attacker's machine from directly accessing port 3389 on the server if the attacker has previously compromised PC1, and in turn PC1 has access to port 3389 on the server. It can be used to pivot to port 3389 using remote port forwarding from PC1. Remote port forwarding allows you to take a reachable port from the SSH client, in this case PC1, and project it into a remote SSH server, the attacker's machine. As a result, a port will be open in the attacker's machine that can be used to connect back to port 3389 in the server through the SSH channel. PC1 in turn proxy the connection so that the server will see all traffic as if it were coming from PC1. A valid question might pop up by this point is why we need port forwarding if we have compromised PC1 and can run RDP session directly from there. The answer is simple. In a situation where we only have console access to PC1, we won't be able to use any RDP client as we don't have a GUI. By making the ports available to your attacker's machine, you can use a Linux RDP client to connect. Similar situations arise when you want to run an exploit against a port that can't be reached directly, as your exploit may require a specific scripting language that may not always be available at machines you compromised along the way. Referring to the previous image, to forward port 3389 on the server back to our attacker's machine, we can use the following command on PC1, SSH tunnel user at 1.101-R 3389 : yada yada yada. This will establish SSH session from PC1 to 1.101 attacker PC using tunnel user. Since tunnel user isn't allowed to run a shell on the attacker PC, we need to run the SSH command with the -n switch to prevent the client from requesting one, or the connection will exit immediately. The -R switch is used to request a remote port forward, and the syntax requires us to first indicate the port will be opening at the SSH server 3389, followed by a colon, and then the IP and port of the socket will be forwarding to. Notice that the port numbers don't need to match, although they do in this example. The command itself won't output anything, but the tunnel will depend on the command to be running. Whenever we want, we can close the tunnel by pressing Ctrl+C, as with any other command. Our tunnel is set and running. We can go to the attacker's machine and RDP to the forwarded port to reach the server. SSH local port forwarding. Local port forwarding allows us to pull a port from a SSH server into the SSH client. In our scenario, this could be used to take any service available in our attacker's machine and make it available through a port on PC1. That way, any host that can't connect directly to attacker's PC but can connect to PC1 will now be able to reach the attacker services through the pivot host. Using this type of port forwarding would allow us to run reverse shells from hosts that normally wouldn't be able to connect back to us, or simply make any service we want available to machines that have no direct communication or connection to us. It says to forward port 80 from the attacker's machine and make it available from PC1, we can run the following command, which is this here. The command structure is similar to the one used in remote port forwarding, but uses the -L option to local port forwarding. This option requires us to indicate the local socket used by PC1 to receive connections and the remote socket to connect from the PC's perspective. Notice that we use the IP address 127.0.0.1 and the second socket as from the attacker's PC perspective. That's the host that holds the port 80 to be forwarded. Since we are opening a new port on PC1, we might need to add a firewall rule to allow incoming connections. Administrative privileges are needed for this. Once your tunnel is set up, any user pointing their browsers to PC1 at this link here and see the website published by the attacker's machine. Port port forwarding with SOCAT. In situations where SSH is not available, SOCAT can be used to perform similar functionality. While not as flexible as SSH, SOCAT allows you to forward ports in a much simpler way. One of the disadvantages of using SOCAT is that we need to transfer it to the pivot host PC1 in our current example, making it more detectable than SSH, but it might be worth a try where no other option is available. The basic syntax to perform port forwarding using SOCAT is much simpler. If we want to open port 1234 on a host and forward any connection we receive there to port 4321 on host 1.1.101, you would have the following command. That's what it looks like here. The fork option allows SOCAT to fork a new process for each connection received, making it possible to handle multiple connections without closing. If you don't include it, SOCAT will close when the first connection made is finished. Coming back to our example, if we wanted to access port 3389 on our server using PC1 as a pivot, we did with SSH remote port forwarding, we could use the following command. Note that SOCAT can't forward the connection directly to the attacker's machine as SSH did, but will open a port on PC1 that the attacker's machine can then connect to. As usual, since a port is being forwarded on the host, we might need to create a firewall rule to allow any connections. If, on the other hand, we'd like to expose port 80 for the attacker's machine so that it is reachable by the server, we only need to adjust the command a bit. As a result, PC1 will spawn port 80 and listen for connections to be forwarded to port 80 on the attacker's machine. Dynamic port forwarding and SOCs. While single port forwarding works quite well for tasks that require access to specific sockets, there are times when we might need to run scans against many ports of a host or even many ports across many machines. Although a pivot host, or all through a pivot host, in those cases, dynamic port forwarding allows us to pivot through a host and establish several connections to any IP address / ports um, we want by using SOCKS proxy. Since we don't want to rely on SSH server existing on the Windows machine in our target network, we will normally use SSH client to establish a reverse dynamic port forwarding with the following command. In this case, the SSH server will start a SOCKS proxy on port 9050 and forward any connection requests through the SSH tunnel, where they are finally proxied by the SSH client. The most interesting part is that we can easily use any of our tools through SOCKS proxy by using proxy chains. To do so, we first need to make sure that proxy chains is correctly configured to point any connection on the same port used by SSH for the SOCKS proxy. The proxy chain configuration can be found at etcproxychains.conf on your attack box. If we scroll down to the end of the configuration file, we should see a line that indicates the port to be used for SOCKS proxying. The default port is 9050, but any port will work as long as it matches the one we use when establishing an SSH tunnel. If we now want to execute any command through proxy we can use proxy chains, and then whatever you want to send through there. All right. And it says, note that some software like Nmap might not work well with socks in some circumstances and might show altered results. So your mileage might vary. Let's get to work. Since you're doing SSH connections from the lab network back to your attacker machine using the net tunnel or the tunnel user for this task, we highly encourage you to use the attack box or EVM instead of your actual machine. Instructions have been given on creating a user that won't allow running commands or transferring files via SSH SCP. So be sure to follow them as provided. It is recommended to create a strong password for tunnel user and make sure it is unique and discardable password, not your actual password in this or any other platform. Okay. It says to complete this exercise, you will need to connect to the jump box using the credentials assigned to you from task 1. If you haven't done so, click the link, get the credentials, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so I need to get these creds because they may have changed by now. But it doesn't hurt to get fresh creds. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's see here. Our first objective will be connect via RDP to THMIS. If we connect directly from our attacker machine, we'll find that port 3389 has been filtered via firewall and is therefore not available directly. However, the port is up and running but can only be accessed from the jump box by using SOCAT, which is available in tool SOCAT. On the jump box, we will forward the RDP port to make it available on the jump box to connect to our attacker's machine. To do so, we run SOCAT with the following parameters. Okay, so let's go back and SSH into this real quick. So let me grab this. And just to make things easier, just do like this. Oop, I need to copy the username, not the password. Okay. All right, looks good. So let's go ahead and get into this. Invalid characters. Oh, okay. Add that space in there. And let's just copy and paste. Okay. And we need to get into SOCAT. So let's go ahead and do that. CD. Okay. Now we have this set here, and let's go ahead and copy and paste. Okay. It says that note that we can't use port 339. The listener is already being used by the jump box for its own RDP service. Feel free to change the listener ports to a different number to avoid other students. Well, let's go ahead and kill that and then change that port to something else. And let's see here. Okay, so let's just do this, I guess. All right. Once the listener has been set up, you should be able to connect to it via RDP from your attacker machine by pivoting through your SOCAT. So let's go ahead and try that. All right. So once connected, you should get a flag for Thomas More desktop. Okay. So let's go ahead and copy and paste. me move this over a little bit. All right, that's whatever. Let's see if this works now. Of course, I didn't change the port. And I believe I set that to 7. Make sure. Yep, 13,387. Okay. And let's see if this works. All right. All right. Yes, we trust the certificate. So let's try to grab this flag. Okay. There it is. I wonder if we can just run it like this. Yep. Okay. Cool. So let's go ahead and grab it. Oh, I thought it was going to crash for a second here. Okay, let's try this again. All right. Let's go ahead and plug this in. Okay. Awesome. So one flag's down, and we need to get to the next flag. All right. Tunneling complex exploits. The THM-DC server is running a vulnerable version of Rigetto HFS. The problem we face is that the firewall rules restrict access to the vulnerable port so that it can only be viewed from THM jumpbox or jump 2. Furthermore, outbound connections from THM DC are only allowed to machines in this network or local network, making it impossible to receive a reverse shell directly to our attacker's machine. To make things worse, the Rigetto HFS exploit requires the attacker to host an HTTP server to trigger the final payload, but since no outbound connections are allowed to the attacker's machine, we would need to find a way to host a web server in one of the other machines in the same network, which is not at all convenient. We can use port forwarding to overcome all of these problems. First, take a look how the exploit works. First, it will connect to the HFS port, our port in Metasploit. To trigger a second connection, the second connection will be made against the attacker's machine on SRV port, where a web server will deliver the final payload. Finally, the attacker's payload will execute and send back a reverse shell to the attacker L port, like so. With this in mind, we could use SSH to forward some ports from the attacker's machine to the jump box. It says SRV ports for the web server, and L port to receive the reverse shell, and pivot through the jump box to reach the R port on THM DC. We would need to do 3 port forwards in both directions so that all the exploits interactions can be proxied through THM JMP2. Rigetto HFS will be listening on port 80 on THM DC, so we need to tunnel that port back to our attacker's machine through the jump box using remote port forwarding. Since the attack box has port 80 occupied with another service, we will need to link port 80 on THM DC with some other port not currently in use by the attack box. Let's use ports 8888. Then, when running SSH in the jump box, to forward this port, we will have to add this here into our command. So I'm going to copy this over. I don't think we need this anymore. So let me just get out of this. And let's go ahead and kill this. Okay. So let's try this here. Let's wait a second here. Okay. I have to use the tunnel user for this. Getting ahead of myself. For service SRV port and L port, let's choose 2 random ports at will. For demonstrative purposes, we'll set SRV port to 66666. L port to 7878, but be sure to use different ports as the lab is shared with other students. So if Two of you choose the same ports when trying to forward them, you'll get an error stating that such port is already in use on the jump box. To forward ports from our attack machine to the jump box, we will use local port forwarding by adding -L to our SSH command. This will bind both ports to the jump box and tunnel any connection back to our attacker machine. Putting the whole command together, we end up the following. Okay. So if you're using the attack box and have joined other network rooms before, be sure to select the IP assigned to lateral movement pivoting, blah, blah, or else shells won't work properly for convenience. The interface, yada, yada, yada. Once all ports are in place, we can start Metasploit. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this here and then start at Metasploit. Be sure to create that tunnel user as they stated up above here. Tunnel user right there. Make sure to add that user and then make sure you start up the SSH and scroll back down here to this here. Now you have to edit the ports as well, which is what I did. So everything's set, ready to go. Fired up Metasploit, and you got the Rigetto stuff ready to go. So all I need to do is just hit run, and it should work. So let's see what it does. Lhost parameter usually serves two purposes. It is used as the IP where a listener is bound on the attacker's machine. To receive a reverse shell, it is also embedded on the payload so that the victim knows where to connect back when the exploit is triggered. In our specific scenario, since THMDC won't be able to reach us, we need to force the payload to connect back to the jump box, but we need listener to bind to the attacker's IP on 127.0.0.1. To this end, Metasploit provides an additional parameter, reverse listener bind address, which can be used to specify the listener's bind address on the attacker's machine separately from the address where the payload will connect back. In our example, we want the reverse shell listener to be around or bound to 127.0.0.1 on the attacker's machine and the payload to connect back to the jump box as it will be forwarded to the attacker's machine through the SSH tunnel. Our exploit must also run on a web server to host and send the final payload back to the victim server. We use SRV host to indicate the listening address, which is in this case 127.0.0.1, so that the attacker machine binds to the web server to localhost. While this might be counterintuitive, as no external host would be able to point the attacker's machine, localhost, the SSH tunnel, will take care of forwarding any connection received on the jump box at server port back to attacker's machine. The R host is set to point to 127.0.0.1 as the SSH tunnel will forward the request to the THMDC through the SSH tunnel established with the jump box. Our port is set to 8888 as any connection sent to that port on the attacker machine will be forwarded to port 80. After launching the exploit, you will receive a shell back on the attacker machine. You should find the flag here, and no session created. So what happened? Let me double check everything here. Oh, that's what I forgot to do the port. So let me do that real quick. Set our port to, what's this, 8888. All right, let me go and check this. See what my, okay, it's still the same. All right, so let's go ahead and try that. All right, now let's run this again and see if it works. Okay, looks like we got something here. Let's see if I can clear the screen here. Nope, I can't. All right, so let's take a look around in here, and there's the flag. So let's go ahead and cat it. Okay, I guess we can't use cats. Then let's do type. Oh, you're right, because we're logging as Windows. So let's do type flag.txt. There we go. So there's the last flag. Okay. And now the conclusion, task 8. In this room, we have discussed the many ways an attacker can move around a network once they have a set of valid credentials. From an attacker's perspective, having as many different techniques as possible to perform lateral movement will always be helpful, as different networks will have various restrictions in place that may or may not block some of the methods. While we have presented the most common techniques in use, remember that anything that allows you to move from one host to another is lateral movement. Depending on the specifics of each network, other paths could be viable. Should you be interested in more tools, techniques, the following resources are available, so check these out. I've used these before as well. I've used SSH Shuttle and Chisel. And that wraps up, folks. Hopefully, you found this video of value. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. As always, thank you all for taking the time to watch my video, and I will see you later.